Your perfect client is not always the payer, not always the decision maker in education, not always the person who signs the check. Your perfect client is the person whose life you change the most. If education sales has you second guessing yourself, take a breath. This is a trust-first, relationship-driven market, and the old tactics, they don't translate. This show replaces guesswork with clarity and a customer acquisition system that builds a pipeline you can trust. I'm Josh Chernikoff, two-time education founder with 2 exits and a lead gen coach for companies in education. Through my ed sales elevation experience over the last 2 years, I've coached 210 companies to leads on repeat. In 2025 alone, I delivered over 2,600 hours of coaching to education companies. My co-host is John Gamba. He also has a successful exit, and now he's the Director of Innovative Programs and the Entrepreneur in Residence at Penn's Graduate School of Education. This is the only show dedicated to customer acquisition for education companies, so consistent listeners go from stalled deals to clarity, credibility, and a pipeline they can rely on. This is Ed Sales Edge, where education company founders earn their edge. Welcome to the first official show of the Ed Sales Edge. Feels good to say that. Formerly Breaking the Grade, which was a fantastic show. Ed Sales Edge is a little bit different. We're going to focus on strategies. Strategy number 1 is around the perfect client. Let's get started. Most education founders think they have a lead problem. And they might. But they almost always first have a perfect client problem. Because if you're chasing the wrong person, no amount of lead gen fixes that. It just gives you more conversations that don't convert. So today is simple. Stop asking, how do I get more leads? Start asking, what do I change the most? Let me start with the absolute simplest way I know to explain this, and I've had this conversation with thousands of founders in the education space. Imagine you are a window washer. That's how you put food on your table. You're walking down the street and you see 2 buildings. One building on the left has dirty windows and one building on the right has clean windows. Most people think you obviously go towards the building with dirty windows because they need you. You wash windows for a living. The truth is, I believe and know, and our community believes and knows, that you should go towards the building with clean windows. Because those people already value clean windows. They love the look, they love the feel, they notice the difference a clean window makes. They're already bought into the outcome. They're already bought into the outcome. The dirty window building, well, they might not care. They might not want to pay. They might not even agree that the windows are dirty. That's a big problem. But founders in education, what I have found, they generally, as window washers, want to clean the dirty windows. And that's not the way to go. They spend time trying to convince people to value something they don't already value. And that is actually really just persuasion. And education doesn't reward persuasion. Education rewards alignment. Education rewards alignment. And when you have alignment, you have a perfect client. Now let me make a quick meta point. This is exactly why we renamed the show. We went from breaking the grade to the Ed Sales Edge for one big freaking reason. Razor sharp clarity for you, our audience. Breaking the grade was big picture. What's broken, what's changing, what needs to improve, and that's all good. Ed Sales Edge is the playbook. It's the edge. It's what you can run this week to get traction. It's what you can think about this second to get more traction in your education business. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to chase everything and you're going to win nothing. Ending that hamster wheel of chasing everything and winning nothing starts now with the perfect client. Here's the correction most people need. Your perfect client is not always the payer, not always the decision maker in education, not always the person who signs the check. Your perfect client is the person whose life you change the most. Your perfect client is the person whose life you change the most. They feel the problem the deepest. They live with the pain day to day. They become the center of gravity for the transformation you deliver. Think about that. They become the center of gravity for the transformation that you deliver. Sometimes they can sign, sometimes they can't. They are the person the yes is ultimately for. Because when you change their life, the whole system moves. The principal looks better. Parents feel cared for. The staff breathes again. The superintendent gets a win they can defend. And when you are aligned, sales get lighter. Not because you're better at selling, but because the right person already values the outcome. You are a window washer, and they have clean windows.
If something feels fuzzy or momentum has stalled, it happens. I get it. Text me directly, 771-333-4233. I read all of the text messages. Back to the show.
Let me make this very real with my own case study. Yeah, from my second business, Flex Academies. Flex Academies started out as an opportunity for me and my team to manage the after-school enrichment programs for PTAs. We would bring in chess and basketball and cooking and mindfulness and soccer. But here's what I got wrong at the beginning. I was going after PTAs that didn't have enrichment programs. I thought, well, they obviously want a program, and guess what? They did want a program. The problem was they didn't need us. There was no fatal issue. There was no culture of after-school enrichment. So I went to these schools and I said, we can bring you and build you an after-school enrichment program. And they said, that's amazing. Give us the contract. Let's rock and roll. They signed the contract. We built a program over the summer. We opened registration in September, 3 weeks in, give or take. And guess what? Nobody signed up at those schools. The reason is because, again, they had no culture of after-school enrichment. So parents, and I can relate to this now, they were used to taking their kids to the dance studio or to the soccer practice or to the art studio. So they weren't necessarily going to uproot their kids from those programs just because the program was coming to the school. No. So it was going to take a generation of families to essentially exit the school for us to build a very large enrichment program. Guess what? I didn't have a generation of kids to wait. I needed business now. So I pivoted. I pivoted hard. And this is the part founders need to hear. My perfect client became PTAs with strong enrichment programs that were already running. my PTAs became buildings with clean windows. Because those programs had real demand. They had real momentum. Easy for me to say. They had a real belief in after-school enrichment. Those programs had grown so much the PTA president and the enrichment coordinator couldn't manage them anymore. They were overwhelmed. They were burned out. They were aging out, carrying a program that went from one thing, one enrichment, to 20. And that is where we changed lives. Because we changed the PTA president's life by taking the entire enrichment program off their shoulders. We were one point of contact for the parents, a program the principal could be proud of, providers who showed up and could scale, predictable revenue, safety's handled, participation is stronger, communication is stronger. Lots of stakeholders benefited. And the stakeholder that benefited the most was the PTA president. We changed their life. That's the perfect client. And once we got that right, we could guarantee outcomes. Guaranteeing is something we'll talk about down the road, but we could guarantee outcomes in terms of participation and revenue we could generate for the PTA. So the mistake I made early on is I went to schools that essentially had dirty windows. They didn't value exactly what I could do for them, but the ones that had clean windows, they did. And by the way, as I sit here today, I'm so grateful for that opportunity to learn. And I'm also grateful to Mark Graben, who interviewed me at one point on a podcast. And he's the one that introduced me to this idea of dirty windows and clean windows. I want to give credit where credit is due because I'm grateful for that interview. So thank you, Mark. So now that you've heard what Mark said to me about the perfect client regarding clean windows and dirty windows, how do you screen for your perfect client without getting lost in titles and org charts? 3 qualifiers: practical, observable, qualifier. Qualifier 1, they already value the outcome. Their existing culture, existing demand, existing belief. You're not selling them on the category. They're already believers. Qualifier 2, the situation is mature enough to matter to them. Think about my PTAs. Oh, it mattered. They had a culture and they were making money from these programs. And I told them I can strengthen that culture and I can make you more money and I can make it safe and I can make it efficient. I can take legal liabilities off your hand. So the situation has to be mature enough to matter for your perfect client, big enough that your work moves the needle, stable enough that implementation isn't chaos. We do not want chaos. If it's too early, too small, or too messy, you will confuse turbulence for traction. Do not confuse turbulence for traction, guys.
The Perfect Client Builder is a practical framework that's going to help you get that perfect client right, get your messaging right, and get your confidence way up. All you got to do is text us 771-333-4233 and we'll send it right to you. Now, back to the show.
Qualifier 3, there's a real champion whose life changes the most. The person who owns the pain day to day, the person who will pull you through the system. You want that person. Sometimes they sign the contract, sometimes they don't. But if you can't identify the human life you are transforming, you're not clear just yet. Now let's talk about what happens when you do target clean window people. Because clean window clients usually already have something. They already have a provider. That's something they have. That's the elephant in the room. They might have a vendor. They might have a partner. So the first elephant isn't, do you care? The first elephant is, we already have someone. How do you fit without blowing up what we already have? Great question. If they value clean windows, they're already paying someone to keep them clean. Duh. So you don't walk in like a bulldozer. Never. You walk in like a pro. You learn what they like most about what they have. That's a pro tip right there. You respect what's working. That's a pro tip right there. You ask where the friction is. Pro tip. You offer support, not conquest. Pro tip. And if there's a transition, you address it cleanly. Very cleanly. Here's how we'd work alongside your current provider. Quote unquote. Here's how we'd pilot without disrupting what's working. Quote unquote. Here's what we protect what your community has and trust without hurting anything and while improving outcomes. Quote unquote. You might be more expensive, guys. And that's good. That's real good. Say it with confidence. If they want what they have now and it's not top notch, then they're not buying a service. They're just kind of buying quality, reliability, peace of mind. Those are two different things. Well, three different things. So the conversation isn't, here's our price. Actually, the conversation is, here's the quality gap. Here's what breaks when it's inconsistent. Here's what changes when it's reliable. And education cost is painful, especially when it's a floating number. Price gets easier when it's anchored to outcomes leaders can defend. I hear that all the time at IEI, at ERDI, when I talk to superintendents and principals. Price gets easier when it's anchored to outcomes leaders can defend. Third elephant, we're actually happy. This is where pros act mature, and you're a pro. If they're happy, don't force a deal. Be supportive. Be curious. Be happy. And make it clear you're here if anything ever changes, because sometimes the perfect client is not the one you win today. It's the one you build trust with. So when a crack appears, and they do appear, a vendor drops the ball, a program outgrows the leader, the wheels start to wobble, you're the first call. I firmly believe a rising tide is good for all ships in education. So if the ship is moving along nicely, be there on the shore to cheer them on. And if the ship gets a little crack and there's a challenge, you can be there to help them.
Last interruption. Before we wrap this show, I want to remind you guys the Ed Sales Elevation Experience is where we help founders develop and design lead generation machines that bring in high quality, high converting leads for their education companies on repeat. Get more details in the show notes. Now, let's bring this show home.
Now let's sharpen this into something you can run with this week. We teach a headline formula in the Ed Sales Elevation Experience because it forces clarity. The formula is, and get ready to write this down unless you're driving or something like that, I help who using what method get which result. I help who using what method get which result. Here's the key. This is not write a headline so you can spam outreach. No, not at all. This is put pen to paper, update your LinkedIn client, and see if your perfect client begins to notice. I help who using what method get which results. Your headline: I help who, using what method, get which results. Because when you're precise, the right people recognize themselves. And when they recognize themselves, they lean in. I help companies in education generate 3 to 5 leads on repeat each week using the Ed Sales Elevation experience. Is that a transformation you're looking for? If you are, you're in the right place. That's my headline. Pretty clear. Very clear. Very effective. Here's a great headline for Flex. I help PTA presidents using white glove program ops get predictable enrichment revenue without daily chaos. Here's another one. I help principals using fast pilots get adoption teachers actually use. I help superintendents using co-creation pilots get measurable wins without procurement drama. I help university leaders using partner alignment sprints launch initiatives that stick past the first semester. Those are actually all headlines that we have created, co-created, for clients in the Ed Sales Elevation experience. This headline isn't branding, it's a filter. It's a filter. It's how you stop attracting dirty window conversations, where you persuade and you start attracting clean window conversations where the outcome is valued. Now the transformation, what you actually sell. Founders talk about features too much. Way too much. Education buyers don't buy features. They buy relief. They buy confidence. They buy a win they can defend. Here's the transformation line to borrow and personalize. We take an existing priority that already matters and we turn it into consistent, supported operation that reduces friction and creates measurable wins for the person carrying the weight. I'm going to read that again. We take an existing priority that already matters, turn it into a consistent, supported operation that reduces friction and creates measurable wins for the person carrying the weight. That's the real sale. Less chaos, more consistency, a leader who can stand behind the program. A person whose life gets lighter. If you want a simple 30-day validation of this, try it. Update your LinkedIn headline, tighten your about section, fine. Post consistently, that's something you can do. Comment thoughtfully, that's something you can do. These are all things you know I believe in LinkedIn, but the first thing you can do is work on your headline. I help who, using what method, get which results. Then watch for signals. Are you getting the right titles to view your profile? Are the right people engaging with your posts? Are you getting inbound DMs that sound like this? This is exactly what I'm dealing with. Are conversations getting lighter and easier? Again, back to the perfect client. They're coming your way. You're not even having to sell them. Now, I want to preview a few future episodes because these aren't theories. These are true examples. Okay? One of them, Sam and Michael from Mediator Spark. Great company. They dialed in the perfect client after the Ed Sales Elevation experience. Boy, oh boy. And with just in a few months, they landed 9 pilots. They worked their tails off, but they landed 9 pilots. Not because they hustled harder, because they stopped trying to be for everyone. Period. They got precise and they put themselves in front of clean window buyers who already valued the outcome. We're going to break down exactly what changed: the client definition, the messaging, the offer, and target discipline. Discipline that these guys took upon themselves and their team to get these 9 pilots. Preview number 2 is Superintendent Brooke Olson Farrell, a friend of mine. She's a cool cat. Superintendent up in Vermont. Brooke is a perfect example of perfect client at the leadership level. She is what you want. She values outcomes. She understands implementation. She wants partners who reduce friction, not vendors who add noise. When you find leaders like Brooke, your job gets simpler. Align, deliver, repeat. Boom. Align, deliver, repeat. So here's the challenge for the relaunch of the Ed Sales Edge. Stop asking, how do I get more leads? Start asking, who do I change the most? Find your clean window client. Build for them. Win with them. Scale from there. Build for them. Win with them. Scale from there. 3 moves for you to do today. Write your perfect client in 1 sentence. The person whose life you change the most. Write your 3 qualifiers. Value, maturity, champion. Write your 1 headline and update your LinkedIn. Then let the market react, baby. Because in education, traction is not magic. I was just talking about this today with a client of ours who was looking for a breakthrough. There's no magic. There's no like breakthrough. It's a repeatable win with the right client. It's a repeatable win with the right client. This is the Ed Sales Edge, the relaunch of Breaking the Grade. Razor sharp clarity starts with the perfect client. I'll see you folks next week on the Ed Sales Edge. All right, that's it for this episode of the Ed Sales Edge. Thanks for joining us. If you sell into education, the goal of this show is very simple: to help you stop guessing what actually moves deals in a system where trust matters. If you want to go deeper, join us inside the Entourage, our private community for education founders and operators selling into schools. You'll see the details in the show notes. If this episode helped you think more clearly, that's great. Subscribe, like it, and share it with another founder in the education space. Until next time, get clear, build trust, set up a system for sales, and keep earning your edge.